Today is Tuesday, March 3rd, 2026. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. War escalates across the Middle East. We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast as we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating. You can email us as well, quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. A lot to get to on the podcast today. Looking on the focus story, CBN's Caitlin Burke questions Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. We'll have that. And on the main thing, is marijuana really harmless? Some shocking studies are emerging that show the dangers. Billy has more coming up on the main thing. All right, I want to tell you about our sponsor of this podcast, Christian Solidarity International, CSI. They are boots on the ground helping persecuted Christians in need. We see in Iran, we see in Nigeria, we see in places all across the globe that Christians are targeted for their faith. It is a feature of the faith, as we talked about on the podcast this week, is not a bug. God promises that those who love him will be persecuted, and he also commands us as Christians to remember those who are in prison as though in prison with them, and those who are mistreated, since you are also in the body. Hebrews 13:3. And right now we have all kinds of believers in that position. And so CSI is coming alongside these persecuted Christians. They are in it for the long haul. They are building long-term relationships. They are there providing immediate needs to families who have been displaced, persecuted, who have lost loved ones to violence, or even have been trafficked, and they're out there rescuing these people as best they can, and they do an amazing job. So if you feel led to help persecuted Christians in need, go to csi-usa.org. That's csi-usa.org and get involved. All right, we are going to go now to the news in 90 seconds. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the U.S. campaign against Iran is just getting started, even as the number of American service members killed climbs to 6. Rubio told reporters on Capitol Hill that President Trump ordered the strikes preemptively after intelligence suggested Iran would retaliate against U.S. forces if Israel struck first, arguing waiting would have meant even higher casualties. He went on to add that this was going to happen anyway, and so that reality was just a matter of when we went. United States Central Command confirmed 2 additional service members' remains were recovered from a previously struck facility, raising the death total to 6 now as Operation Epic Fury continues. The administration says it briefed the bipartisan Gang of 8 and filed notice under the War Powers Resolution. Within 48 hours, though Rubio maintained no president, Republican or Democrat, has fully accepted the law's constitutionality. The mission, according to Rubio, dismantle Iran's ballistic missile capability and prevent it from rebuilding. He claims Tehran is producing more than 100 short-range missiles per month and thousands of one-way attack drones, building what he described as a protective shield for its nuclear ambitions. That's the big story right now. There are more stories. You can check them out over at cbnnews.com. I want to go right into a couple details here on this escalating war in Iran. And as these missiles fly and American troops are continuing to be in harm's way, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says prayer is central to every decision being made at the Pentagon. Responding to a question from CBN's Caitlin Burke, he said he and his wife pray daily for U.S. troops. Here, take a listen to the Secretary responding to Caitlin Burke's question.
As you've said, there are a large amount of U.S. service members that are in harm's way right now. What is your prayer for them?
First of all, my prayer for them is that I do pray for them. My wife prays for them. Our family prays for them. Our cabinet prays for them. None of this is done on a whim. Having been in their boots, having been in their shoes, having been in their flight suits, I know we think about them with every decision that we make and every recommendation that we make to the President of the United States. Those recommendations are made prayerfully. And when I pray, every day for them and for this mission. I pray simply for the biblical wisdom to see what is right and the courage to do it. It's going to take courage to follow through on this. There's going to be a lot of noise, and we pray for that, and we hope all of you do as well. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
A great question there from CBN's Caitlin Burke, and obviously it underscores the reality that so many are facing right now as war breaks out. CBN's Joshua Swanson is in Jerusalem, and he gave us an update on what it's like to get back to life just as he was walking into the office. And you can hear sirens had just sounded, and he's walking, and people are trying to live their lives. So he gave us a little update on that, on what life is like here under the cloud of war.
Enemy aircraft intrusion. That's right. Just before I was leaving my apartment. It seems every time I'm trying to go to work, there's some sort of alarm. Welcome to day 4 of the war with Iran. Joshua Swanson here for CBN News. And yes, there was an alarm that just went off announcing an enemy aircraft intrusion. Usually means probably likely a drone from Iran entered our airspace here in Jerusalem. The good news is that was the first alarm we had since yesterday afternoon. Seems like there might be a shift. The frequency of launches has really decreased, which is good news for us. But overnight, we had some big news. There was an embassy or an explosion in Riyadh. There was an explosion in Doha, Qatar. There was a missile launched towards Jordan. So it continues to expand, this war across the Middle East. And then the biggest news is that the U.S. State Department has issued an evacuation order for all U.S. citizens in multiple countries across the Middle East, including here in Israel. But life continues here in Jerusalem. We got some puppy friends over there and saying hi to Eden. The streets are much more full today than they have been in the last few days. People are coming out more, mostly people with dogs. It looks like there's another big dog over there. And also construction continues. Yeah, construction. So no matter if there's a war or not, we still need to build more houses here in Jerusalem because so many people are moving here. Life continues. Continue to pray for us.
Stay tuned to, that's Joshua Swanson there from our CBN bureau there in Jerusalem, and Chris Mitchell, Julie Stahl, Joshua Swanson, the entire team there doing a fantastic job. Be praying for them as they are obviously in the midst of this. Iran is just indiscriminately at this point shooting rockets and drones and sending them in to all over the place in Israel. And so that is obviously a threat that they live with, but Israelis are very much used to it. As Joshua was pointing out there on his walk, they are back to life. The construction is going. People are walking their dogs. This is what Israelis do, even as the war in Gaza was unfolding. You know, you see people even down south. They live right near that Gaza border, and there are communities there, and they're living under constant threat because there are entire nations who want to see Israel wiped off the map entirely. And we know God has a different story for that in mind. So we obviously pray as we watch all of this unfold and continue to pray that God's will be done, and that that people would hopefully ultimately turn towards him. You know, there's a lot of this, you know, going on here when you are forced to face your mortality, as the people in Iran have had to do. 30,000 or even more protesters killed for going out in the streets and protesting the regime over the last few months. And we're hearing stories of Jesus appearing to people in dreams and visions, and this is happening again and again. So continue to pray for God's name to be made great in the midst of all this chaos and war. All right, we're going to go to the main thing now. And is marijuana really harmless? Dr. Raymond Wiggins joined Billy Hallowell for today's main thing to discuss some shocking studies that are emerging that show the dangers of consuming THC. That conversation is today's main thing.
Is marijuana dangerous or harmless? That is a question we are tackling today here on CBN News, and I am joined by Dr. Raymond Wiggins. How you doing today?
I'm great. How are you, Billy? Great to be with you.
It's great to have you back. You know, we have talked many times before about marijuana. You are an expert in this area as a physician, as somebody who has written extensively and researched on it. And it's been a while since you've been on with us. When you were last on, you had just published your book, Weeding Out the Myths About Marijuana, and that was back in June of 2024. Now, a lot has changed since that time in terms of new research, studies that have come out about marijuana. Let's just start there. Give us an update regarding what are those studies saying about marijuana?
Well, you're absolutely right. There have been countless new studies in the past 2 years. My book goes through or has research through early 2024. And this is a super hot area of research. And recently I did a PubMed search of studies, and I looked at cannabis in 2024 and 2025, studies that had come out during that time frame. And it showed over 6,500 results. And so I narrowed it down to the largest, most powerful, impactful studies. And I analyzed about 300 of them. They're the most powerful ones. There's some huge studies, very impactful studies that are out there. Some studies with millions of people, studies that are multi-center studies, and a lot of what we call systematic reviews and meta-analyses. These are studies that take many other studies and lump them together and in a very strict scientific manner analyze all the data. And having 300 of those during this time frame may not seem like a lot, but that's a huge number of great studies that we can lean in on now. What they do is they give us a really clear picture of things that we've been looking at. It's kind of like going from standard def TV to 4K or 8K in a very short period of time. The data is much stronger. It's much more reliable. And these studies cover just about every aspect of marijuana that we've studied in the past. And there are many recent studies about the heart and the cardiovascular system. There's a lot of great studies about mental health, including depression and anxiety, paranoia, personality disorders, psychosis, and a lot of new studies about the devastating effects of marijuana during pregnancy, and a couple of other studies. A couple of studies in that area actually show a pretty strong correlation between use during pregnancy and autism spectrum disorder. And a few of the studies that we have are on brand new topics that we really didn't know a lot about in the past. One shows a 4 times risk of diabetes among marijuana users. And then there's another one that shows a 6 times risk of obesity in marijuana users. So a lot of great new information out there.
This is the thing, when you wrote the book, there was already so much research. Now there's even more. And you have so many people out there though who are still saying it's just marijuana. It never killed anyone. But that's interesting too, because there's new data that dives into some of that. What does the science say about that argument?
Well, there's a lot of studies. We had tons of studies already that show that marijuana does kill. It doesn't kill in the same way that opioids do. It generally doesn't kill directly like opioids, but what it does is it kills through heart attacks and cardiovascular disease. It kills through suicide, through auto accidents, through violence, and much more. And there's several new studies that came out in the past year and a half that showed a 1.5 to 2.5 times risk of all-cause mortality. In other words, you're 2.5 times more likely to die if you're a marijuana user versus not being a user. And there's a 3-fold risk if you have cannabis use disorder or addiction. For instance, regarding auto accidents, there's a lot of new studies out confirming that marijuana impairs performance while driving. It seems intuitive, logical that we would know that, but these studies are proving it. There's some studies that are showing the visual issues that cause difficulty driving. And unfortunately, what we're finding in these studies is that these issues don't fully resolve in people who are chronic users or people who started young. So many marijuana users don't drive safely, even when they're not high. And there's another study that showed impairment not just with THC, the active ingredient in marijuana, but also with CBD. So even using CBD, you can be impairing your driving. THC users and CBD users don't hold their lane position well, is what one study showed. And that impairment, unfortunately, just leads to real world consequences. A 55% increase in fatal auto accidents among those who use THC, and a twofold increase in injury accidents. And these statistics are in line with what we've known in the past. It's just cementing these and really giving us much more data.
Yeah. And, it's interesting, too, because it feels like this data is ignored by a lot of people. I mean, the data is out there. It's not new. There is new data as you're breaking down. Why do you think so many people, public policy wise, especially, ignore the dangers of marijuana?
Well, it's interesting that I'm writing another book right now about this subject, and it's for parents. And the person that I'm writing it with is a former politician, a state rep. And the reason that she wanted to get involved in this is because she saw so much money coming through to politicians, and it was changing their votes, unfortunately. And she would also, at the same time, she would get letters, emails from people whose children or loved ones had issues or maybe had died as a result of marijuana. And she didn't want to sit back and let this happen. I was just looking the other day at on the a website of a publication that's put out by the marijuana industry, and they showed 15 studies that showed that marijuana really didn't cause a lot of issues. Now again, that's out of 6,500 studies, and you can find those studies, but the vast majority show that there are issues, and so they cherry pick these studies, and I think there's no doubt that it's for one reason. It's for the money. There's a lot of money behind this issue.
All right, Billy, appreciate that conversation there. Important stuff. All right, that's going to leave us with time on the podcast today. For one last thing, going to take a look at Ecclesiastes 5:2. Be not rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God, for God is in heaven and you are on earth. Therefore, let your words be few. And that is so true. It just be quick to listen and slow to speak. Good thought for us all here as we wrap up this edition of the Quick Start Podcast. Make sure you are staying tuned to CBNnews.com and the CBN News YouTube channel. All the latest with the war in Iran and more from a Christian perspective. God bless. See you back here tomorrow. Be safe.